The dust kicked up by the convertible tasted like sulfur and betrayal. Christopher was not looking at the road. He was looking at me, grinning like a shark who just smelled blood in the water. He dangled my passport and my phone out the window, gripping them tight enough to turn his knuckles white. "Let us see if the princess can survive an hour without Amex," he shouted over the engine's roar. Jason, his business partner, laughed from the passenger seat. "I bet 20 minutes before she is back at the hotel begging." Then, the tires screeched. I stood frozen in 5-inch heels on a desolate back road in Ibiza, watching the silver car disappear around the bend, taking my identity, my money, and my husband with it. Before we see how she survives, drop a comment and let me know where you are watching from tonight. I want to see how far our community reaches. The dust settled on the asphalt, coating my skin in a fine, gray powder. Silence rushed back in to fill the space where his laughter had been. A normal wife would have panicked. She would have started walking back toward the hotel, rehearsing her apology, preparing to beg for the return of her phone and her dignity. But I was not a normal wife anymore. I was a liability he had just tried to write off. I checked my pockets. 96 euros. That was the liquid capital of my new life. It was not enough for a flight, barely enough for a room, but it was enough to make a choice. Christopher expected me to be at the reception desk in 20 minutes, weeping. That was the script he had written. I decided to burn the script. I took off my heels, not back toward the resort, but forward, toward the highway. The asphalt burned the soles of my feet, and the midday sun hammered against my shoulders, but I treated the pain like data. It was just information, not a reason to stop. 2 miles later, I reached a service station cluttered with semi-trucks heading for the mainland ferry. A driver was filling his tank nearby. He looked tired, the kind of exhaustion that meant he just wanted to get the job done and go home. I approached him, not like a stranded tourist, but like a client closing a deal. He looked at my dusty designer dress and shook his head, muttering about company policy. I pulled out the 96 euros. He hesitated. It was close, but not enough to risk his job. My gaze shifted to the sunglasses perched on my head. Vintage tortoiseshell. Limited edition. Retail value $800. I took them off. They were a symbol of the life I was leaving, a life where I was an accessory, just like them. Expensive, fragile, and easily discarded. I looked the driver in the eye. Then, with a sharp, deliberate snap, I broke the left arm off the frame. The driver flinched. I handed him the broken glasses. The gold logo was still intact. The lenses scratch-free. They were worthless as fashion now, but the materials were still valuable. I told him to sell the lenses. I told him I did not care about the rest. I was not paying him with an accessory. I was paying him with debris. It was a statement. The Jessica who cared about resale value was gone. He took the broken frames and the cash, then jerked his head toward the cab. I climbed into the passenger seat without looking back at the resort skyline shimmering in the distance. As the truck rumbled onto the highway, I did not feel fear. I felt the cold, hard click of a door locking shut. Christopher won his bet. The princess did not survive an hour. She died on the side of the road, and someone entirely different was riding this truck out of Ibiza. The vibration of the ferry deck rattled through the soles of my feet, a constant, mechanical reminder that I was moving away from the only life I had known for 12 years. I stood at the rail, watching the dark water of the Mediterranean churn below. In the silence between the waves, I could hear the question everyone would ask. Why did she stay? If he was a narcissist, if he was controlling, why did she give him a decade of her prime? It was not weakness. It was economics. Specifically, it was the gambler's fallacy. Shutterstock. In finance, this is the cognitive bias, where an investor refuses to fold on a losing hand simply because they have already put so much money into the pot. They convince themselves that because they have invested heavily, a payout must be coming, that the market has to correct itself. That is what my marriage was. It was not a romance. It was a failing stock I kept trying to prop up with my own labor. I closed my eyes and saw the version of myself from 12 years ago. I was not a trophy then. I was a shark. top of my class in law school, recruited by 3 major firms before graduation. I understood leverage. I understood contracts. But then I met Christopher, and he presented me with a merger. He needed a manager for his life, a curator for his image, and a silent partner for his ego. In exchange, he offered security. I took the deal. And every time he chipped away at my confidence, every time he isolated me from my friends, I doubled down. I thought, I have already put in 5 years. I have already fixed his relationship with his mother. I have already built his network. If I leave now, I lose all that equity. So I stayed for 6 years, then 8, then 12. I kept throwing good years after bad, waiting for the return on investment that never came. Standing on that ferry, shivering in the sea spray, I finally audited the books. The market had not just fluctuated, it had crashed. There was no payout coming. Christopher was not an asset to be managed. He was a liability that was draining me dry. The realization was cold, but it was liberating. I had been insolvent for a decade, and I just had not admitted it. The ferry docked in Valencia before dawn. The city lights were a blur of amber and neon, but I could not afford the city. The city cost money, and I needed to stretch every euro. I bypassed the hotels and the taxis. I found a bus heading inland, toward the dry, red heart of the country. I needed to go where the cost of living was low, and the questions were few. I drifted for days. The lush coast gave way to arid plains and dusty olive groves. The landscape became harsh, stripped of pretense, just like me. My stomach became a hollow ache, a constant reminder of my new reality. I slept in bus stations and ate bread rolls meant for 1 meal that I stretched into 3. Finally, the bus dropped me at the edge of a village in La Mancha that looked like it was crumbling back into the earth. The air smelled of dry dust and ancient stone. I was exhausted, filthy, and starving, but for the first time in 12 years, the ledger was balanced. I had 0 assets, but I also had 0 debt. Hunger is not a feeling, it is a noise. By the 3rd day in La Mancha, the noise was deafening. The landscape here was relentless red earth, scorching sun, and silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight. I had walked until my heels bled, and then walked some more barefoot. My body, once maintained by personal trainers and organic juice cleanses, was now consuming itself. I saw an almond tree near a crumbling stone wall. It was gnarled and ancient, clinging to the dry soil. I reached for a low-hanging branch, my fingers trembling. I was not thinking about dignity. I was thinking about calories. But as I pulled, the horizon tilted sideways. The blue sky rushed up to meet me, and the ground slammed into my shoulder. The darkness that followed was not scary. It was restful. I woke up to the smell of damp stone and something savory boiling. I was lying on a cot in a room with whitewashed walls. An older woman was watching me. Her face was a map of deep lines, etched by decades of squinting at the sun. This was Lucia. Behind her stood Matteo, a man who looked like he was carved from the same olive wood as his walking stick. They did not coo over me. They did not ask for my tragic backstory. Lucia simply handed me a cup of water and pointed to a bowl of soup on the table. When I finished eating, Matteo pointed to a broom in the corner. The transaction was clear. If I wanted to stay, I had to contribute. There was no free charity here. It was the most honest exchange I had experienced in years. A week later, I walked into the small village library. The air conditioning felt foreign against my sunburned skin. I sat down at a communal computer and logged into my email for the first time since Ibiza. My inbox was full. My heart hammered against my ribs. Part of me, the part that had been conditioned for 12 years, expected an apology. I expected worry. I expected a husband terrified that his wife had vanished. I opened the first message from Christopher. The subject line was not, "Where are you?" It was, "Stop this drama immediately." I clicked it open. The text was short, brutal, and devoid of humanity. "I am done playing games, Jessica. If you are not home by Friday, do not bother coming back. I have frozen the joint accounts. You have zero access to the funds. Your credit cards have been reported stolen. Stop the tantrum and grow up. I stared at the screen. He was not looking for a missing person. He was looking for a misplaced set of keys. He was annoyed, not afraid. He had not called the police because he did not want the bad press. Instead, he had cut off my money to starve me out, like a siege warfare tactic. I looked at my hands resting on the keyboard. They were rougher now, the nails broken, the skin dry. Christopher thought he was trapping me. He thought that by cutting off the money, he was cutting off my oxygen. But sitting in that quiet library, I realized he had done the opposite. He had burned the only bridge I had left. I could not go back, even if I wanted to. The cage was closed, but I was on the outside. I logged out, walked back into the heat, and returned to the farm. Saffron is the most expensive spice in the world for one reason. It refuses to be mechanized. It demands the human hand. We started at 4 a.m, under a sky that was more ink than blue. The crocus flowers had to be picked before the sun fully rose, or the heat would damage the stigmas. My back ached with a dull, throbbing rhythm, and my fingers were stained a deep, indelible purple. It took 150 flowers to produce a single gram of dry spice. 150 times I had to bend, pinch, and pull just to create a pinch of red gold. It was grueling, repetitive, and exhausting, and I loved it. For the first time in my life, the math was simple. Input equaled output. If I picked more, we had more. There was no politics, there was no gaslighting. The flowers did not promise to bloom and then change their mind because I wore the wrong dress. But while my hands were learning the rhythm of the harvest, my Boston brain was waking up from its coma. I watched Lucia struggle with her accounts one evening. Her system was a chaos of loose receipts and handwritten notes stuffed into a cigar box. She was bleeding money to middlemen who bought her premium product at bulk rates. Asking for permission is a habit of the powerless. I just took the box. I did not speak fluent Spanish yet, but I spoke fluent Excel. I organized her supply chain. I identified a distributor in Madrid who supplied Michelin star restaurants and was desperate for single-origin organic saffron. I drafted an email, translated it with an app, and negotiated a contract that increased their profit margin by 40%. When I showed Mateo the numbers, he didn't call me smart for a girl. He didn't pat me on the head. He looked at me with respect. He treated me like a partner. That night, lying in the dark, I opened the mental ledger of my marriage. I thought about the concept of invisible labor. In economics, this refers to work that is essential for a system to function but goes unpaid and unrecognized, usually performed by women. For 12 years, I had been the chief operating officer of Christopher Incorporated. I managed his calendar, smoothed over his conflicts, bought the gifts for his clients, and curated the dinner parties that won him contracts. I managed the emotional climate of our home like a weather control system. But because there was no paycheck attached, Christopher saw it as nothing. He saw it as me sitting at home. My labor had been vast, but it had no market value in his eyes. I had been depositing millions of dollars of effort into our emotional bank account, and he had treated it like spare change. Here, in the dust of La Mancha, the currency was real. I held a jar of dried saffron threads in my hand. It weighed almost nothing, but it was worth more than gold. I had helped create this. I had harvested it, processed it, and sold it. My value was no longer theoretical. It was tangible. I fell asleep with purple-stained fingers, and for the first time in a decade, I felt solvent. 6 months is a long time in farming. It is the difference between a seed and a harvest. In 6 months, the saffron farm had gone from surviving to thriving. We had new irrigation, a waiting list of buyers in Madrid, and the red earth was blooming with purple flowers. I was different, too. The woman who had collapsed under an almond tree was gone. In her place was someone made of muscle, calluses, and silence. I was in the drying shed, weighing the day's yield, when I heard it. The sound of a modern engine tearing up the dirt track. I walked out to the courtyard, wiping my hands on my apron. A silver sedan pulled up, kicking up dust just like the convertible in Ibiza. The door opened, and Christopher stepped out. He was wearing a bespoke suit, Italian wool, worth more than this entire farm. But something was off. The tie was slightly loosened. His eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like a man who was running, not arriving. He took off his sunglasses and forced a smile, but it did not reach his eyes. It was a reflex, a muscle memory of charm. "Jessica," he said, spreading his hands. "Look at you. You have made your point. You really committed to the bit." I stood my ground. I did not step forward. I did not speak. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to that smooth, patronizing register he used when he wanted something. "I am ready to forgive you. The silent treatment, the running away, we can put it all behind us. I have a flight booked for us tonight. First class. We can be back in Boston by morning. We have the charity gala on Friday. You know how important that is for appearances." I looked at him. Really looked at him. For the first time in half a year, I did not see a husband. I saw a bad investment. "I am not going anywhere, Christopher," I said. My voice sounded deeper, rougher than he remembered. His smile flickered and died. He stepped closer, invading my space, bringing the smell of expensive cologne and desperate sweat. "You do not understand," he hissed, the charm evaporating. "You have to come back. Now." "Why?" I asked. "Because you miss me?" "No," he snapped. "Because the Securities and Exchange Commission is auditing the firm on Monday morning." The words hung in the hot air. The puzzle pieces clicked into place with the precision of a vault locking shut. He wasn't here to rescue me. He was here because he was drowning. "They are freezing everything," he continued, the panic finally bleeding through his arrogance. "I am over-leveraged. Jessica, I need to liquidate the offshore accounts in the Caymans to cover the hole in the operational fund before the auditors arrive. I need the cash to make the books look solvent." He reached out, his hand shaking slightly. "Those are joint accounts. I cannot access them without your signature. If you do not sign those transfer papers today, I go to prison for fraud." I stared at him. The man who had left me on the side of the road because he thought I was helpless was now standing in the dirt, begging for my help. He had stripped me of my credit cards, my phone, and my dignity, thinking he held all the power, but he had forgotten the one thing about joint assets. They work both ways. He was not the savior. He was the beggar. And I was the only person in the world who could sign his pardon. Christopher stared at me, his face flushing a deep, angry crimson. The realization that I held the power did not humble him. It enraged him. He looked me up and down, curling his lip in disgust. "You think you have leverage?" he spat, stepping back to look at my work boots and the dirt on my hem. "Look at you. You are ruined. Your skin is rough, your hair is a mess, and you smell like dirt. Who is going to want you now, Jessica? You were a trophy. Now you are just damaged goods. Without me, without my money, you are nothing but a peasant playing in the mud." His words were meant to cut, to find the insecurities he had planted in me for a decade. But the skin he was trying to pierce was no longer soft. It was calloused. I walked over to the farmhouse table and picked up an old clay water jug. It had shattered 2 months ago. In my old life, I would have thrown it in the trash and bought a new one. But Matteo had taught me kintsugi. I held the jug up between us. "Do you see these gold lines?" I asked calmly. "It is a Japanese art form. When a pot breaks, you do not hide the cracks. You mend them with resin mixed with gold dust. The philosophy is simple. The break is not an error. It is part of the history of the object. And once it is mended, the piece is considered more beautiful and more valuable than it was when it was perfect." I set the jug down with a solid thud. "You broke me in Boston, Christopher. You shattered me in Ibiza. But you did not realize that by leaving me in the dirt, you gave me the gold I needed to put myself back together. I am not damaged goods. I am kintsugi, and I am worth more now than I ever was when I was sitting on your shelf." I reached into my apron pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Christopher's eyes lit up. He reached for it, assuming it was the transfer authorization he needed to save his skin. He tore it open, his hands shaking. But as he scanned the first page, the color drained from his face. It was not a signature for the bank. It was a petition for dissolution of marriage, accompanied by a separation of liability affidavit. I did not forget how to be a lawyer, Christopher, I said, my voice steady and cold. I drafted those myself. That document formally separates my finances from yours as of the date you abandoned me in Ibiza. It proves I had no knowledge of, or access to, the accounts you are trying to raid. If the Securities and Exchange Commission is coming for you on Monday, they will find that you are acting alone. I took a step forward, forcing him to take a step back toward his rental car. I am not an asset you can liquidate to cover your mistakes. I am a hostile witness. Now, get off my farm. He stood there for a moment, mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at the papers, then at the sprawling saffron fields, and finally at me. He realized there was no charm left to use, no threat that could land. He turned around, got into his silver car, and reversed down the driveway. I watched him go. The dust cloud rose up behind his car, just like it had in Ibiza. But this time, I was not standing in it, coughing and helpless. I was watching it settle from my front porch. Lucia and Matteo came out of the house. They did not ask what happened. They just set the table for dinner bread, oil, and a paella made with our own saffron. I sat down with them. I pulled out my phone and checked my bank account. The balance was 3,000 euros. It was a fraction of what I used to spend on a handbag, but every single cent belonged to me. It was clean money. The sun set over the purple fields, turning the world gold. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the dry, honest air. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full. If you believe that your scars are proof of your survival, not your weakness, share this story. And tell me in the comments, what is the one thing you need to walk away from to find yourself?